So, it really seems to you that what happened to me in 1860 is worthwhile writing down? Very well. I will tell you the story, but on the condition that you will not divulge it before my death. You will not have to wait long, a week at most. I'm a marked man. It's a good start. I could have told you the story of my whole life, which holds many other interesting details, but for what there would be needed in time, courage and paper. There is plenty of paper indeed, but my courage is at a low ebb. And as to the time that I have yet left me, I may be compared to the life of a candle flame. Soon tomorrow's sun will rise, a demon sun, as impenetrable as life itself. So goodbye, my dear sir. Read this and bear me no ill will. Pardon me those things that will appear evil to you, and do not complain too much if there is exalted and disagreeable odor, which is not exactly that of a rose. You ask me for a human document, here it is. Ask me for neither the empire of the great Mogul, nor the photograph of the Maccabees, but request, if you will, my dead man's shoes, and I will them to you and no other. Okay. Old pair of shoes coming up. You already know that this took place in 1860, the year before, about the month of August, at the age of 42. I had become a theologian. That is, I copied the theological studies of a priest at Nicathoroi, an old college chum, who thus tactfully gave me my board and lodging. In that same month of August, 1859, he received a letter from the vicar of a small town in the interior, asking if he knew of an intelligent, discreet, and patient person who would be willing, in return for generous wages, to serve as an attendant to the invalid Colonel Felisbert. The priest proposed that I take the place, and I accepted it, eagerly, for I was tired of copying Latin quotations and ecclesiastic formulas. Alia jacta est, and what was the other one? Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. If you buy Mr. Scipio, that's what he says. First I went to Rio de Janeiro to take leave of a brother who lived at the capital, and from there I departed for a little village of the interior. But there you go. Perfect video setup right there, with Rio de Janeiro in the background. I couldn't have picked it better. When I arrived there, I heard the bad news concerning the colonel. He was pictured to me as a disagreeable, harsh, exacting fellow. Nobody could endure him, not even his own friends. He had used more attendants than medicines. In fact, he had broken the faces of 2 of them. Oh, Jesus. But to all this, I replied that I had no fear of persons in good health, still less of invalids. So after my first visit to the vicar, who confirmed all that I had heard, and recommended me charity and forbearance, I turned toward the colonel's residence. The colonel that breaks faces. I found him on the veranda of his house, stretched out on a chair and suffering greatly. He received me fairly well. At first, he examined me silently, piercing me with 2 feline eyes. Then a kind of malicious smile spread over his features, which were rather hard. Finally, he declared to me that all the attendants he had ever engaged in his service hadn't been worth a button, that they slept too much, were imprudent, and spent their time courting the servants. 2 of them were even thieves. Not worth a button. Ah, Mr. Benjamin Button. And are you a thief? No, sir. Then he asked me my name. He first asked me if I was a thief. Scarcely had I uttered it when he made a gesture of astonishment. Your name is Columbo? No, sir. My name is Procopio Jose Gomez Valongo. Valongo? Maybe? Valongo? So he only heard Columbo from that? From Procopio Jose Gomez Valongo? Valongo? He came to the conclusion that this was no Christian name, and proposed henceforth to call me simply Procopio. I replied that it should be just as he pleased. If I recall this incident, it is not only because it seems to me to give a good picture of the colonel, but also to show you that my reply made a very good impression upon him. The next day he told the vicar so, adding that he had never had a more sympathetic attendant. The fact is, we lived a regular honeymoon that lasted 1 week. Well, at least it was a honeymoon. I guess he had lots of sex with the colonel there. For the dawn of the 8th day, I knew life of my predecessors, a dog's life. I no longer slept there. I no longer thought of anything. I was showered with insults and laughed at them from time to time with an air of resignation and submission, for I had discovered that this was a way of pleasing him. His impendences proceeded as much from his malady as from his temperament. His illness was of the most complicated. He suffered from aneurysm, rheumatism, and 3 or 4 minor afflictions. He was nearly 60, and since he had been 5 years old, he had been accustomed to having everybody at his beck and call. That he was surely one could well forgive. But he was also malicious. He took pleasure in the grief and humiliation of others. At the end of 3 months, I was tired of putting up with him and had the resolve to leave. Only the opportunity was lacking. Take a bus, man. Take a bus and get the hell out. But that came soon enough. One day, when I was a bit late in giving him a massage, he took his cane and struck me with it 2 or 3 times. That was the last straw. I told him on the spot that I was through with him, and I went back to pack my trunk. He came later to my room. He begged me to remain, assured me that he wasn't anything to be angry at, that I must excuse his ill-humoredness of old age. He insisted so much that I agreed to stay. I'm nearing the end, Procopio, he said to me that evening. I can't live much longer. I am upon the verge of the grave. You will go to my burial, Procopio. Under no circumstances will I excuse you. You shall go. You shall pray over my tomb. And if you don't, he added, laughing, my ghost will come at night and pull you by the legs. Do you believe in souls of the otherworld, Procopio? Nonsense. And why don't you, you blockhead? He replied passionately with distended eyes. That is how he was in his peaceful intervals. What he was during his attacks of anger, you may very well imagine. He hit me no more with his cane, but his insults were the same, if not worse. With time, I became hardened. I no longer heeded anything. I was an ignoramus, a camel, a bumpkin, an idiot, a loghead. I was everything. It must further be understood that I alone was favored with these pretty names. He had no relatives. There had been a nephew, but he had died of consumption. Don't remember exactly what consumption was. Was it smallpox or something? As to friends there who came now and then to flatter him and indulge his whims, made him but a short visit. Hey, Vatty. How are you, sir? How are things in Vattyland? Hopefully no more tornadoes there. Enough of the tornadoes. Thank you for the lurk. You're fine? Glad to hear it, dude. All sorts of things happening in there. Fires, tornadoes. All you need is an earthquake and you have all of them. I alone was always present to receive his dictionary of insults. More than once I resolved to leave him. But as the vicar would exhort me not to abandon the colonel, I always yielded in the end. Wording a book with Brazilian tales. Kind of curious of more cultures. I've read English books, American books, finished a couple of Russian books. It's time to spread on. Nowhere you can go here to escape the weather. Underground, man. You need a bunker. You need a nice, lovely atomic bunker. That should be enough. Not only were our relations becoming very much strained, but it was in a hurry to get back to Rio de Janeiro. I was in a hurry. At 42 years of age, one does not easily accustom himself to the perpetual seclusion with brutal, snarling old invalid in the depths of a remote village. Just to give you an idea of my isolation, let it suffice to inform you that I did not even read the newspapers. No internet connection, I suppose. Outside of some more or less important pieces of news that were brought to the colonel, I knew nothing of what was going on in the world. Therefore, I yielded to get back to Rio at the first opportunity, even at the cost of breaking with the vicar. And, I may well add, since I am here making a general confession, having spent nothing of my wages, I was itching to dissipate them at the capital. That's always... it's a nice way when you splurge some money, feel good. Then you feel poor. C'est la vie. Very probably my chance was approaching. The colonel was rapidly getting worse. He made his will, the notary receiving almost as many insults as I did. The invalid's treatment became more strict. Short intervals of peace and rest became rarer than ever for me. Already I had lost the meagre measure of pity that made me forget the old invalid's excesses. Within me there seethed a cauldron of aversion and hatred. At the beginning of the month of August, I decided definitely to leave. The vicar and the doctor, finally accepting my explanation, asked me but a few days more service. I gave them a month. At the end of that time I would depart, whatever might be the condition of the invalid. The vicar promised to find a substitute for me. No more insults. You'll see now what happened. On the evening of the 24th of August, the colonel had a violent attack of anger. He struck me. He called me the vilest names. He threatened to shoot me. Finally, he threw in my face a plate of porridge that was too cold for him. The plate struck the wall and broke into 1,000 fragments. "You'll pay me for it, you thief," he bellowed. For a long time he grumbled. Towards 11 o'clock he gradually fell asleep. While he slept, I took a book out of my pocket, a translation of an old Argicore Darlingcore romance, which I had found laying about, and began to read it in his room, at a small distance from his bed. I was to wake him at midnight to give him his medicine, but whether it was due to fatigue or to the influence of the book, I too, before reaching the second page, fell asleep. Awesome book. That's probably going to happen to me one day while reading this. No viewers, and then it's going to be a... The cries of the colonel woke me with a smart. In an instant I was up. He apparently in a delirium. You know, I should do a snoring stream. I'll just record like 5 seconds of snoring and that way I could do a 24-hour stream and I would just like a book run in the background. It would be awesome. There we go. 24-hour stream a-coming. Just need a long enough book to roll. He apparently, in a delirium, continued to utter the same cries. Finally, he seized his water bottle and threw it at my face. I could not get out of the way in time. The bottle hit me in the left cheek, and the pain was so acute that I almost lost consciousness. With a leap, I rushed for the invalid. I tightened my hands around his neck. He struggled several moments. I strangled him. When I beckoned that he no longer breathed, I stepped back in terror. I cried out, but nobody heard me. Then, approaching the bed once more, I shook him so to bring him back to life. It was too late. Yeah, cut off the middleman. Just have a scrolling book stream. Make the viewers do all the reading. Hell yeah, man. Hell yeah. You have the piano music there to entertain you? That's good enough. The aneurysm had burst, and the colonel was dead. I went into the adjoining room, and for 2 hours I did not dare to return. It was impossible to me to express all that I felt during that time. It was intense stupefaction, a kind of vague and vacant delirium. It seemed to me that I saw faces grinning on the walls. I heard muffled voices, the cries of the victim, the cries uttered before the struggle, and during its wild moments continued to reverberate within me. And the air, in whatever direction I turned, seemed to shake with convulsions. Do not imagine that I am inventing pictures or aiming at a verbal style. You might even read better than I do. You know? You know what you could do? You don't even need... You need to pull up my stream and stream my stream, and you can read my thing. And then you can do your own streaming thing. Your own reading stream. That would be perfect. And I think you would do better. You know? Because you would actually be present there. I swear to you that I heard distinct voices that were crying at me, "Murderer! Murderer!" All was quiet in the house. The tick-tock of the clock, very even, slowly, dryly metrical, increased the silence and solitude. I put my ear to the door of the room. I hope of hearing a groan, a word, an insult, anything that could be a sign of life, that might bring back peace to my conscience, not consciousness. I was ready to let myself be struck 10, 20, 100 times by the colonel's hand, but nothing. All was silent. I began to pace the room aimlessly. I sat down. I brought my hands despairingly to my head. I repented ever having come to the place. Cursed be the hour in which I ever accepted such a position, I cried. And I flamed with resentment against the priest of Nichelroy, against the doctor, the vicar, against all those who had procured the place for me and forced me to remain here so long. They too, I convinced myself, were accomplices in my crime. We will run it by Cam. He can do the reading. Ah, yes. Awesome. Awesome idea, dude. And the silence finally terrified me. I opened a window in the hope of hearing at last the murmuring of the wind, but no wind was blowing. The night was peaceful. The stars were sparkling with the indifference of those who removed their hats before a passing funeral procession and continued to speak of other things. I remained at the window for some time, my elbows on the sill, my gaze seeking to perpetuate the night. Penetrate the night. He wasn't having sex with the night, trying to perpetuate it. Forcing myself to take a mental summary of my life so that I may escape the present agony. I believe I was only then that I thought clearly about the penalty of my crime. I saw myself already being accused and threatened with the dire punishment. For this moment fear complicated my feeling of remorse. I felt my hair stand on end. A few minutes later I saw 3 or 4 human shapes spying at me from the entrance. Humans. There they seemed to be awaiting in ambush. I withdrew. The shapes vanished into the air. It had been a hallucination. Before daybreak I bandaged the wounds that I had received in my face. Then only did I pluck up enough courage to return to the other room. Twice I started, only to turn back. But it must be done, so I entered. When I did not at first go to the bed. My legs shook, my heart pounded. I thought of flight. But what would have been a confession? That would have been a confession of crime. I was, on the contrary, very important to me to hide all traces of it. I approached the bed. I looked at the corpse, with its wildly distended eyes, its mouth gaping, as it was uttering the eternal reproach of the centuries. Cain, what hast thou done with thy brother? I discovered on the neck of the marks of my nails. Oh, Jesus. Well, this is important why you should always cut your nails, you know. In the event you want to strangle someone, try not to leave too much evidence. I buttoned the shirt to the top and threw the bed cover up to the dead man's chin. When I called the servant and told him that the colonel had died towards morning, I sent him to notify the vicar and the doctor. The first idea that came to me was to leave as soon as possible under the pretext that my brother was ill, and in reality I had received several days before from Rio a letter telling me that he was not at all well. But I considered that my immediate departure might arouse suspicion, and I decided to wait. I laid out the corpse myself with the assistance of an old, nearsighted Negro. I remained continually in the room of the dead. I trembled lest something out of the way should be discovered. I wanted to assure myself that no mistrust could be read upon the faces of the others, but I did not dare to look any person in the eye. Everything made me impatient, the going and coming of those who, on tiptoe, crossed the room, their whisperings, the ceremonies and the prayers of the vicar. The hour having come, I closed the coffin, but with trembling hands, so trembling that somebody noticed it, and commented upon it aloud, with pity. Poor Procopio! Despite what he has suffered from his master, he is strongly moved. It sounded like irony to me. I was anxious to have it all over with. We went out. Once in the street, the passing from the semi-obscurity to the daylight dazed, and I staggered. I began to fear that it would no longer be able for me to conceal the crime. I kept my eyes steadily fixed upon the ground and took my place in the procession. When it was all over, I breathed once more. I was at peace with man, but I was not at peace with my conscience. And the first night, naturally, I spent in resentment and affliction. Need I tell you that I hastened to return to Rio de Janeiro, and that I dwelled there in terror and suspense, although far removed from the scene of the crime? I never smiled. I scarcely spoke. I ate very little. I suffered hallucinations and nightmares. They do have some hallucination drugs out there, right? Hallucinatory drugs. What's their hallucinatory drug there, the famous one? They say it's bitter or something. Some sort of a... They get it from a cactus or something? Can't think of the name. Let the dead rest in peace, they would say to me. It is not all out of reason to show so much melancholy. And I was happy to find how people interpreted my symptoms and praised the dead man highly, calling him a good soul, surly, in truth, but with a heart of gold. And as I spoke in such wise, I convinced myself, at least for a few moments at a time. Another interesting phenomenon was taking place within me. I tell you to become, you will perhaps make some useful deduction from it. And that was, although I had very little religion in me, I had a mass slung from the eternal rest of the Colonel at the Church of the Blessed Sacrament. I sent out no invitations for it. I did not whisper a word of it to anybody. I went there alone. I knelt during the whole service and made many signs of the cross. I paid the priest double and distributed alms at the door, all in the name of the deceased. I wished to deceive no one. The proof of this lies in the fact that I did all this without letting any other know. To complete this incident, I may add that I never mentioned the Colonel without repeating, "May his soul rest in peace." May you never discover my fingernails, my finger imprints on his neck. And I told several funny anecdotes about him. That time he was choking to death. So funny. Some amusing caprices of his. About a week after my arrival at Rio, I received a letter from the vicar. He announced that the will of the Colonel had been opened, and I was there designated as the sole heir. Imagine my stupefaction. I showed it to my brother, to friends. They all read the same thing. It was there in black and white. I was really the sole heir of the Colonel. When I suddenly thought that this was a trap to catch me. But when I considered that there was other ways of arresting me, if the crime had been discovered. Moreover, I knew the vicar's honesty, and I was sure that he would not be a party to such a plan. I reread the letter 5 times, 10 times. 100 times. It was true. I was the colonel's sole heir. How much was he worth? My brother asked. I don't know. But I know he was very wealthy. He probably has to live in Dad's house now. Really, he's shown that he was a very true friend to you. He certainly was. He was, Thus, by a strange irony of fate, all the colonel's wealth came into my hands. At first I thought of refusing the legacy. It seemed odious to take a soul of that inheritance. Soul. That might be a currency. Soul. S-O-U there, without L. Soul. Brazilian currency. It seemed worse than the reward of a hired assassin. For 3 days this thought obsessed me, but more and more it was thrust against the consideration that my refusal would not fail to awake suspicion. Finally, I settled upon a compromise. I would accept the inheritance and would distribute it in small sums secretly. Lovely. Why are we seeing the thing? Shouldn't be seeing the lower part. Q-ish. Should be better now. There we go. This was not merely scruple on my part. It was also the desire to redeem my crime by virtuous deeds. And it seemed the only way to recover my peace of mind and feel that accounts were straight. At some point, we should read the Telltale Heart. Kind of reminds me of that. I made hurried preparations and left. As I neared the little village, the sad event returned obsessively to my memory. Everything about the place, as it looked at once again, suggested tragic deeds. At every turn in the road, I seemed to see the ghost of the colonel's loom. And despite myself, I invoked my imagination, his cries, his struggles, his look on that horrible night of the crime. Crime or struggle? Really, it was rather a struggle. I had been attacked. I had defended myself, and in self-defense, it had been an unfortunate struggle, a genuine tragedy. This idea gripped me, and I reviewed all the abuse he had heaped upon me. I counted the blows, the names. It was not the colonel's fault. That I knew well. It was his affliction that made him so peevish and even wicked. But I pardoned everything. The worst of it was the end of the fatal night. I also considered that in any case the colonel had not long to live. His days were numbered. Did not he himself feel that? Didn't he say every now and then, how much longer have I to live? 2 weeks? Or 1? Perhaps less? This was not life. It was slow agony, if one may so call the continual martyrdom of that poor man. And who knows? Who can say what the struggle of his death were not a simple coincidence? Yes, he just happened to die at the same time you are choking him to death. That sometimes happens, I'm sure. I'm sure that, in the billion deaths of men, at some point that happened as well. The guy died of old age while he was getting choked. That was, after all, quite possible. It was even more probable. Never tell me the odds. Careful weighing of the matter showed that it couldn't have been otherwise. At length, this idea, too, engraved itself upon my mind. Something tugged at my heart as I entered the village. I wanted to run back, but I dominated my emotions and I pressed forward. I was received by a shower of congratulations. The vicar communicated to me the particulars of the will, enumerated the pious gifts, and, as he spoke, praised the Christian forbearance and the faithfulness which I had shown in my care of the deceased, who, despite his temper and brutality, had so well demonstrated his gratitude. "Certainly," I said, looking nervously around. I was astonished. Everybody praised my conduct. Such patience, such devotion. The first formalities of the inventory detained me for a while. I chose a solicitor. Things followed their course in regular fashion. During this time there was much talk of the colonel. People came and told me tales about him. But without observing the priest's moderation, I defended the memory of the colonel. I recalled his good qualities, his virtues. He had not been austere. Austere, they would interrupt. Nonsense. He is dead, and it's all over now. But he was a regular demon. And they would cite incidents and relate the colonel's perversities, some of which were nothing less than extraordinary. Need I confess it? At first I listened to all this talk with great curiosity. Then a queer pleasure penetrated my heart, a pleasure from which sincerely I tried to escape, and I continued to defend the colonel. I explained him. I attributed much of his fault-finding to the local animosity. I admitted that he had been a trifle exciting, somewhat violent. Somewhat? Why, he was furious as a snake, explained the barber. And all, the collector, the apothecary, the clerk, all were of the same opinion, and they would start to relate their anecdotes. They reviewed the entire life of the deceased. The old folks took particular delight in recalling the cruelties of his young youth, and that queer pleasure, intimate, mute, indesirous, grew within me a sort of moral tapeworm, whose coils I tore out in vain, for they would immediately form again and take firmer grip than ever. This guy is going to confess to these dudes because they hated him. That would be amusing. Let's find out. The formalities of the inventory afforded me a little relief. Moreover, public opinion was so unanimously unfavorable to the colonel that little by little the place lost the lugubrious aspect that he had first struck me. At last I entered into the possession of the legacy, which I converted into land titles and cash. Good old cash. Several months had elapsed, and the idea of distributing the inheritance in charity and pious donations was by no means so strong as it had at the first. It even seemed to me that this would have been a sheer affliction. I revised my initial plan. I gave away several insignificant sums to the poor. I presented the village church with a few new ornaments. I gave several thousand francs to the Sacred House of Mercy, etc. I did not forget to erect a monument upon the colonel's grave, a very simple monument, all marble, the work of a Neapolitan sculptor who remained at Rio until 1866, and who has since died, I believe, in Paraguay. Years have gone by. My memory has become vague and unreliable. Sometimes I think of the colonel, but without feeling again the terrors of those early days. All the doctors to whom I have described his affliction have been unanimously as regard to the inevitable end in store for the invalid, and were indeed surprised that he should so long have resisted. It's just probable that I may have involuntarily exaggerated the depiction of the various symptoms, but the truth is that he was sure of sudden death, even had his fatality not occurred. Good old excuses. Should remember this if I ever kill someone. Goodbye, my dear sir. If you deem these notes not totally devoid of value, reward me for them with a marble tomb, the place where, there for my epitaph this variant which I have made of the divine Sermon of the Mount. Blessed are they who possess, for they shall be consoled. And that's the end. Okay. Kill someone, get his inheritance, get away with it. The end. I don't think I ever heard a story like this. And live happily ever after. Well then. I don't know what to say, dude. What the hell was the story? It's like no moral, no anything. Yeah, that's the end. Okay then. I think I could write a better ending to this thing. Almost any ending would be better than this. I actually thought that he was going for the thing where he's going to, admit he killed him because everybody was against him. And you know what? I even killed him! Something like that. Crime? Who says crime doesn't pay? Indeed! This is a crime does pay type of a story. Weird. And then I got away with it. The end.